Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the IWillAim podcast. You'll learn what it takes to be an effective leader, which is essential in our business these days. Welcome, Gaeron.
Thanks, Will. Glad to be here. Let me just give you a couple of minutes of background on myself. I spent 3 decades in Big Four public accounting, about 20 years leading audit and due diligence engagements, and a dozen years as the partner in charge of a number of different internal compliance functions. Since I've left that role, I've been focused on governance, risk, and compliance through both my writing and my consulting work.
What is the best way to improve the state of leadership, in your opinion?
Ooh, so tough one. But I would say, going back to your point on character, which I agree with, I think the two key character values that we need to be looking for in leaders are a sense of mission and a
Hmm.
sense of humility. You talked about this idea of people might be successful. Let's talk about monetization, right?
Yep.
Um, a lot of times you'll get this relentless focus on revenue growth, profit growth, and those are fine, right? In a business, you want to grow the business, and that makes perfect sense. But if you think Dr. Jason Brennan, for example, at Georgetown, professor of ethics there, said that the most important social responsibility of business is to ensure the world is genuinely better off with that business performing its core function than without. And so that's a sense of mission, right? It's this idea of, hey, I'm trying to make the world a better place. And that's not through things that are adjunct to my mission, right? To my core business. It's my actual core business. I'm going to carry it out in a way that makes the world a better place. And profitability should come from that. Growth should come
Yep.
from it. But Simon Sinek talks about this, right? Start with why, right?
Yes.
And then the other point would be humility. Like, I'll go back to your book. Future leaders must not only be skilled and have vision, but they must be passionate and selfless, which again, I think comes down to this idea of humility in selflessness. But, again, like we've been saying, I think that's really hard. How many times do we see leaders who are truly selfless, truly humble, truly willing to sacrifice their own interests for the greater good? We talked about Simon Sinek. I know you're a fan of his too. Leaders eat last,
Yep.
right? Is that really our experience in the real world, or do the leaders usually eat first and eat everything and eat it in a fancy dining room,
Yep.
right? And Sinek's he knows the real world, right? Part 7 of the book actually focuses on the fact that most leaders don't have that characteristic of eating last. And, again, not a new insight. Go back to Ibn Khaldun, 600 years ago. He wrote that people pay great attention to this world and the positions and wealth that it offers. As a rule, they feel no desire for virtue and have no special interest in virtuous people. And then even worse, he goes on to add, a person who desires rank must be obsequious and use flattery, as powerful men and rulers require. So, when you talk about character, and again, I think that's super important. I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that development of that character, of that mission, of that humility, of that selflessness is very counterintuitive to people. That's not how we're biologically wired. We're biologically wired to get ahead, right?
Yes.
Evolution tells us survival of the fittest, which often means survival of the most ruthless. And, ironically, maybe as society has gotten richer, it's actually made us more ruthless, because now the table stakes aren't, hey, it's good enough if I have enough to eat, if I have somewhere safe to sleep, if I'm not getting chased by a leopard, right? Um, now success means climbing your way up to the top of the ladder, which inherently just puts you in competition with other people. So I totally agree with you. I think that point that you make on character is a really vital one. But again, a very, very tough thing to navigate, I think, to have that person who is truly a servant leader who takes it from the perspective of what's the organization's mission? How can I help drive that mission? Let me understand my own shortcomings. Let me understand my own temptations and, have maybe themselves surrounded by people who will sort of keep a little bit of a rein on them, right?
I like the point where you said, look at the mission of the organization, how what we do tie into that mission of the organization. And you also talk about humility, which is extremely important. The one thing I think also is important when we're doing improving the state of leadership is the people at the top need to ask themselves the question, are they good leaders? Because many times this happens where a leadership training initiative would be implemented and they'll be talking about their people getting the training, but they themselves seem to be outside of that bubble. And when that happens, I felt like it's like us and the people. They need training. Leadership development starts from the top. So if you're sitting in a position right now, you're the CEO of the company, a head of a department, the COO, you need to ask yourself, are you a good leader? And how are you modeling the way? So the change need to come from the top. And also the other element that I think is important outside of important humility is compassion. We need to have compassion for our people because one of the critical problem, as you mentioned, the world has changed where success isn't just having a good living. Success become like a rat race, right? Climbing this proverbial rat ladder where the bar gets raised every year. And if you're not quite close, then it's going to be hard for you to even touch the bar. So therefore, one of the byproduct of that is burnout. A lot of people are suffering burnout, and company that lack compassion are missing the point that their people are just getting destroyed, right? Their mental health is affected. So if you're truly a good leader, you should ask yourself the question, go back to the question, the point that you mentioned in your book, what matters the most to this company, right? And of course, like you said, the company is not there for charity, so it must make profit. But something gotta be there gotta be like a, a rules or guidelines in place to say here's how we get there and here's what we would do, and making sure that when you go through the process that you're not burning through your people. Because if you think that you all your people need training and you don't, you're starting at the wrong position. And I think that that's one thing that if there's any leaders listening to this episode is ask yourself the question first: are you a good leader? And if you want people to be trained, you need to go to that training. You need to experience the training so you could say it's a good training or not for your people. But to say that your people need training, you don't need training, that's just downright probably not wrong, not right. And I think it's one of the starting point of changing or improving the state of leadership.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's one of the things that I tend to do in my book is I cite lots and lots of people going back thousands of years because a lot of these insights, again, they're not new. And with what you were talking about with leaders needing to get the leadership training, I just keep thinking of a couple of Sundays back, the homily about seeing the speck in your brother's eye and not seeing the log in your own,
Yes,
right?
yes. Yep.
That gospel there that really describes human beings really well, right? And like you said, I think a lot of leaders have this tendency to go, well, okay, I've gotten into this position of leadership. Obviously, I'm great, right? I don't need to make any improvements. So, let's improve those below me, but I don't need to look in the mirror. And I think you're right. I think that's a very toxic trait.
I love that you quote the homily a few weeks ago because that's really prevalent. Sometimes even I as human do that. Like I could see someone's like fault. but I don't point it out, but I could see it, but I tell myself, don't judge, right? I always like, as every human, we have a judge side of us. And sometimes we see something and we like, oh no, this person. And in my mind, I'm something is like the thing is spinning. And I'm like, no, that's not true. That's not correct. Don't do that. Like you at least self audit, use
Mm.
your awareness to kind of like be on top of the situation. If my audience wants to reach out to you and engage you in risk management, compliance, and things like that, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Email is always good. It's Gaeron at McClure-CPA.com. I'm happy to talk to anybody on any subject. Um, I am actually quite passionate about ethics in business world. And so, yeah, always happy to have a conversation with anybody on that subject.
Thank you, Garen, for your time. And I want to flash your book one more time. I absolutely love reading. I'm reading it right now. And thank you again for being my guest today. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Will. Love the opportunity.
You're welcome.